Hand over the wallet, old man. Nobody needs to get hurt here. It's just business. The voice sliced through the peaceful hum of the downtown diner like a blade through silk, a jarring discord in the gentle melody of clinking coffee cups and muted conversation. The lunch crowd, a mixture of office workers grabbing a quick bite and elderly couples enjoying their afternoon tea, didn't laugh so much as produce a nervous, collective murmur, a sound of fear desperately masquerading as disbelief at the sheer audacity of what was unfolding before them. The man wielding the threat was lean and jittery, his energy a frenetic, desperate pulse. His eyes darted across the room like a caged animal, feeding hungrily on the anxiety blooming in every corner. He had selected his target with what he believed was tactical genius. An elderly gentleman, his white hair neatly combed, his weathered hands resting peacefully on the red vinyl booth. And seated across from him, a younger man who appeared to be the very definition of unremarkable. He was of average height, dressed in worn cargo pants and a faded black hoodie. His face was covered by a few days' worth of stubble, his baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. He looked exhausted, distracted, his attention seemingly absorbed by the swirling cream in his coffee as he stirred it with a slow, methodical rhythm. The attacker, this would-be predator, smirked with satisfaction. He had seen 1,000 like him, soft, weak, forgettable, easy prey. He leaned closer to the older man, his voice dropping to a mocking whisper. "What's your boy gonna do, start crying? Maybe film it for social media?" He chuckled at his own joke. "Let's not make this harder than it needs to be." If you're enjoying this story of quiet strength, triumphing over loud arrogance, make sure to subscribe to The Final Watch. We bring you tales where true competence speaks louder than empty threats, where the unassuming become unstoppable. Hit that subscribe button and join us for more stories that celebrate the silent professionals who walk among us. But when Captain Marcus Reeves retired after 28 years with the Metropolitan Police Force, a career that had carved lines of quiet authority into his weathered face, looked at his son, he saw none of the fear the attacker expected. He saw nothing at all. His son Daniel didn't look up, didn't flinch. The spoon continued its lazy, circular journey through the coffee, a tiny, silent metronome counting down to a moment only he could perceive. The attacker saw a timid nobody. Marcus saw a stillness that was more terrifying than any scream. It was the calm not of peace but of deeply coiled power, a placid lake surface beneath which ancient creatures slept. He had seen that look before, in the eyes of hostage negotiators approaching a desperate standoff, in the focused gaze of tactical teams just before they breached the door. It was the absolute absence of emotion, a state where instinct, training, and purpose fused into a single unbreakable point. The predator had made a catastrophic miscalculation. He was a jackal, loud and posturing, who had just wandered into the hunting grounds of a sleeping tiger. He saw a lamb to be slaughtered, but Marcus knew he was standing in the shadow of the slaughterhouse itself, completely oblivious to the fact that he was the one about to be processed. The very air around their small booth seemed to thicken, the ambient noise of the diner fading into a dull, distant roar as the world contracted to this single, tense point of conflict. The attacker's mistake was one of classic arrogance. He judged the book by its unassuming cover, unaware that the pages within were written in blood and fire from conflicts he couldn't even imagine. A story of competence so profound it had no need for a flashy binding or boastful title. The silence that followed his demand stretched thin and taut, a wire humming with unspoken potential. The other patrons in the diner were frozen, a gallery of horrified statues. Some fumbled for their phones beneath the tables. Others simply stared, their forks hovering halfway to their mouths, their small world shattered by this intrusion of brutal reality. The mugger thrived on this paralysis. It was his stage, and fear was his spotlight. He shifted his weight, the worn denim of his jacket creaking, a sound that seemed unnaturally loud in the suddenly hushed room. He was enjoying the moment, the raw power of being the one who controlled the narrative, the one who held the fear of an entire room in his grimy hand. He gestured with the knife, a cheap folding thing that was more for intimidation than actual combat. "I'm not asking again, Grandpa," he sneered, his eyes flicking from Marcus's stoic face to Daniel's still downcast head. "The wallet, now." It was then that Daniel finally stopped stirring his coffee. The tiny rhythmic clinking ceased, and the silence that rushed in to fill the void was absolute, profound, and heavy with implication. He placed the spoon down on the napkin with a precision that was almost surgical. The movement was economical and utterly devoid of wasted energy. He didn't wipe his hands. He didn't sigh. He didn't prepare himself in any way a normal person would. He simply stopped. Then he lifted his head. His eyes, a cold steel gray, met the mugger's for the first time. There was no fear in them. There was no anger. There was no emotion at all. It was the dispassionate, analytical gaze of a watchmaker studying the gears of a complex and malfunctioning machine. He was not seeing a man. He was seeing a problem, a series of interconnected mechanical flaws that needed to be corrected. He registered the attacker's stance, the way his weight was unevenly distributed, favoring his back foot. He noted the grip on the knife, a clumsy, untrained hold with the thumb on the flat of the blade, a grip that promised bravado but lacked any real technical skill. He saw the slight tremor in the hand, the product of adrenaline or something else, a weakness to be exploited. He observed the way the eyes kept darting toward the door, a clear indicator of his intended escape route and his fundamental lack of commitment to the confrontation. In the space of a single heartbeat, he had deconstructed him, analyzed his threat potential, calculated the vectors of his possible movements, and formulated 3 different responses, each one escalating in its level of controlled violence. Marcus recognized the shift instantly. It was a change in the very air around his son. A subtle drop in temperature, a sharpening of focus so intense it was almost a physical presence. It was the moment the observer became the operator. The mugger, blinded by his own arrogance, saw only a young man finally looking at him. He misinterpreted the stillness as terrified compliance. "That's better," he said, a triumphant sneer twisting his lips. He reached out his free hand, palm up, demanding the wallet. Now we're getting somewhere. He had no concept of the world he was about to enter, no understanding of the chasm that separated his brutish, street-level aggression from the chillingly precise and lethal competence that was now fully awake and focused entirely upon him. He thought he was dictating the terms of the engagement. In reality, he had just ceded all control, becoming nothing more than a variable in an equation that had already been solved. The solution was coming, and it would be swift, silent, and final. The moment stretched into an eternity, a single crystalline second of perfect, pre-violent stillness. The mugger's hand, grimy and expectant, hung in the air between them. His lunge was not a lunge at all, but a clumsy, overconfident grab for the leather wallet Marcus had placed on the table. It was the final piece of the puzzle clicking into place. The stimulus for which the response had already been programmed and rehearsed 1,000 times in dusty training rooms and on sun-baked ranges halfway across the world. For the patrons watching, it was a blur, a sudden, incomprehensible explosion of movement. For Daniel, it was a symphony of motion executed in slow, deliberate time. As the attacker's fingers brushed the leather of the wallet, Daniel's body, which had been a study in placid relaxation, became a conduit for pure kinetic purpose. His left hand, the one that had been resting casually on the table, shot out. It did not slap the hand away. It did not block the arm. It moved with the fluid, undeniable certainty of a piston, his fingers wrapping not around the wrist but around the delicate cluster of bones at the base of the thumb. His grip was not one of brute strength, but of anatomical precision. He applied pressure, a sudden, sharp, and excruciating spike of pain that traveled up the arm like a bolt of lightning. The nervous system screamed. The brain registered only a blinding white flash of agony, and the fingers, which had been curled to grab, involuntarily splayed open. It was a textbook demonstration of pressure point control, designed to bypass strength and attack the body's fundamental wiring. Simultaneously, his other hand moved. As the attacker's hand spasmed open, Daniel didn't grab the knife. He struck the back of the wrist with the hardened edge of his palm, a sharp, percussive blow aimed directly at the ulnar nerve. The impact sent a shockwave of electric fire through the arm, and the grip on the cheap knife vanished. The weapon, his symbol of power and control, became dead weight. It tumbled from nerveless fingers, spinning once in the air, a flash of cheap steel in the diner's warm light, before clattering onto the checkered floor with a sound that was both pathetically small and deafeningly final. The entire disarm took less than a second. Before the knife had even settled on the floor, Daniel was already in motion, rising from the booth, not with a panicked scramble, but with a smooth, controlled pivot that used the mugger's own forward momentum against him. He flowed around the table, a whisper of movement, closing the distance between them. The attacker's mind, still reeling from the two distinct, overwhelming waves of pain, was struggling to process what had just happened. His weapon was gone. His arm was a useless, burning appendage. The small, insignificant man was suddenly inside his guard, a place no one was ever supposed to be. He tried to pull back, to create space, to reset the encounter, but he was no longer in control. He was a puppet, and Daniel held all the strings. Daniel's movements were a masterclass in efficiency, a brutal ballet, where every step, every touch had a devastating purpose. With the man's arm still trapped in his anatomically perfect grip, he stepped in, not away, rotating the wrist inward in a way it was never meant to bend. This wrist lock, a simple and foundational technique, forced him to follow the direction of the pressure. To resist was to invite the clean, sharp snap of bone. The attacker's body, desperate to escape the torment, contorted, bending forward at the waist, his head coming down. It was exactly what Daniel wanted. As the torso bent, he used his free hand not to strike him, but to gently cup the back of the head. To an untrained observer, it might have looked like he was trying to steady him, an act of bizarre compassion. In reality, he was taking control of his posture, his balance, his entire world. With the arm locked and the head guided, Daniel completed the pivot, sweeping the feet from under him with a simple, almost elegant leg reap. There was no grunt of effort, no strain. The attacker fell. It was not a chaotic, flailing tumble. He went down as if he were a sack of grain being expertly unloaded, his trajectory completely managed. Daniel guided the descent, ensuring the head didn't crack against the hard tile, a small act of professional courtesy that spoke volumes about his level of control. The attacker landed hard on his back, the air exploding from his lungs in a pained, wheezing gasp. He lay there, stunned, blinking up at the diner's ceiling, trying to understand the sequence of events that had led him from being the apex predator of this small ecosystem to being helpless prey on the floor. Before he could even attempt to move, Daniel was kneeling on his chest, a knee pinning each shoulder to the ground. The pressure wasn't crushing, but it was absolute, immobilizing him completely. He still had the arm twisted in a lock that sent waves of nausea and fire through him with every breath. Daniel's face was inches from his, and for the first time, the attacker saw him clearly. The vacant, tired look was gone. His steel-gray eyes were now laser-focused, burning with an intensity that was utterly terrifying. They held no malice, only a chilling, profound competence. He had wanted to see fear. Instead, what he saw in those eyes was his own reflection, a pathetic, whimpering man who had made the single worst mistake of his miserable life. The diner was utterly, completely silent. The only sound was the mugger's ragged, panicked breathing and the distant, almost forgotten wail of a siren approaching. Daniel hadn't even broken a sweat. He remained in position, a silent, gray-clad guardian, his posture perfect, his breathing even, waiting for the authorities to arrive and take delivery of the problem he had so neatly and efficiently solved. The entire violent encounter, from the first touch of the wallet to him being pinned and neutralized on the floor, had lasted less than 3 seconds. The arrival of the police was a sudden injection of noise and procedure into the tableau of stunned silence. 2 uniformed officers entered first, their hands instinctively hovering over their sidearms, their eyes wide as they took in the scene, the dropped knife glinting under the fluorescent lighting, the patrons still frozen at their tables, and the small, unassuming man calmly kneeling on the chest of a fully grown attacker who was now sobbing quietly, a mixture of pain, humiliation, and sheer terror. The officers, young and trained for chaos, found themselves momentarily baffled by the sheer orderliness of the situation. There was no struggle, there was no shouting, there was just a problem, and its solution presented as a finished work. A third figure followed them in, moving with a slower, more deliberate gait. This was Lieutenant Sarah Chen, a woman whose 22 years on the force had weathered her face into a man. She had seen everything the city had to offer, from the absurd to the horrific, and her default setting was a deep and abiding skepticism. She scanned the room, her gaze lingering for a moment on Marcus, who gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod of professional recognition. one veteran to another. Chen's eyes then settled on Daniel. She saw what the mugger had seen, a small man in a plain hoodie. Her mind, conditioned by years of experience, immediately began constructing a narrative. Perhaps the man had slipped. Perhaps he was high and had simply collapsed. The idea that this person had been the primary actor seemed on its face improbable. She knelt beside the subdued mugger. "What happened here?" she asked, her voice a low rumble of authority. It was Daniel who answered, his voice steady and devoid of any inflection. "He threatened my father with that knife," he said, nodding toward the discarded weapon. "He attempted to take property by force. I perceived an imminent threat and neutralized it." Chen raised an eyebrow. The language was precise, clinical, the detached jargon of a police report. "You neutralized it," she repeated, a hint of disbelief coloring her tone. "All by yourself?" The question, meant to be skeptically probing, hung in the air. Marcus's jaw tightened slightly, but Daniel's expression didn't change. "Yes, Lieutenant," he replied. His use of her rank was subtle but clear acknowledgement that he understood the dynamics of the situation perfectly. "I did." Chen grunted, still unconvinced. She motioned for the junior officers to cuff the suspect, and as they hauled the now compliant man to his feet, Daniel rose with that same fluid efficiency. He stood back, giving them space, his posture relaxed but aware. Chen turned her full attention to him. "I'm going to need to see some identification, and we'll need a full statement from you and your father." Marcus produced his retired officer's credentials, which earned a flicker of recognition and respect from Chen. Then Daniel reached into the small, simple backpack that had been sitting by the booth and pulled out a wallet. He didn't offer a driver's license. He handed her a rigid tan and brown card, a United States Uniformed Services identification card. Chen took it, her eyes glancing at the photo, the same impassive face but wearing a crisp uniform, and then at the information printed below. Her skeptical expression began to dissolve, replaced by a flicker of confusion, then dawning comprehension. Lieutenant Chen walked over to the patrol car, the small, unassuming ID card held carefully in her hand. She had seen thousands of military IDs in her career. Young privates on leave, reservists, retired veterans. They were common, but something about this one, combined with the chilling efficiency she had just witnessed, felt different. She slid into the driver's seat and keyed the information into the onboard computer, accessing the National Law Enforcement Database that could cross-reference military service records for official inquiries. She expected to see a supply clerk, an administrative specialist, a mechanic, something that would fit the quiet, unassuming man inside. The screen flickered as the system processed the request. Then the results loaded. Chen leaned forward, her eyes narrowing as she read the lines of text that scrolled onto the screen. It was like watching a stone being dropped into a deep, still pond, the ripples of information spreading outward, each one more shocking than the last. The first line was simple enough. Reeves, Daniel M., rank, Master Sergeant, E8. An E8, a senior non-commissioned officer, that alone was impressive. Most people never made it that far, and those who did were the backbone of the entire military structure, possessing decades of experience and institutional knowledge. But it was the lines that followed that made the air catch in Chen's throat. Unit, classified, U.S. Navy Special Warfare Command. Chen blinked, reading it again. Naval Special Warfare Command. The umbrella for the Navy's most elite units. Her fingers tapped on the keyboard, requesting a more detailed, security-cleared summary, a privilege her rank afforded her for joint operational purposes. The system asked for secondary authentication. She provided it. The screen refreshed. A new block of text appeared, and this time, it was not a ripple. It was a tidal wave. Primary MOS, Special Operations Chief Nusat W. Qualifications, Halo Haho, Jump Master, Special Operations Combat Diver, Advanced Close Quarters Combat Instructor, Designated Marksman, Counterterrorism Specialist, Awards and Decorations, Navy Cross, Bronze Star Medal, Village Valor Device, 2 OLC, Purple Heart, 3 OLC, Navy and Marine Corps Commendation Medal, Village Valor Device. Chen stopped reading. She felt a cold knot form in her stomach. This wasn't just a soldier. This was an elite operator from one of the most secretive and lethal units in the U.S. military. The Navy Cross, the nation's second highest award for valor in combat, multiple Bronze Stars with valor devices, 3 Purple Hearts indicating he had been wounded in combat on at least 3 separate occasions. The qualifications were a litany of the military's most difficult and dangerous schools. This man, this quiet, tired-looking man in the black hoodie, was a living, breathing legend, a member of the most elite and shadowy fraternity of warriors on the planet. Her earlier skepticism echoed in her mind, and she felt a hot flush of professional shame. She had been the arrogant one. She had been the fool, making assumptions. She looked through the windshield of her cruiser back into the diner. She saw him standing beside his father, speaking in a low, calm voice, reassuring him. She saw not a civilian, not a victim, but a quiet professional on a rare day off, a warrior who had been tested in the crucibles of modern warfare and had not been found wanting. She slowly got out of the car, the ID card now feeling like a sacred object in her hand. Her entire perception of the scene, of the world even, had been irrevocably altered. She walked back into the diner, her posture different. She was no longer the senior authority figure on the scene. She was a municipal cop in the presence of greatness. As Lieutenant Chen re-entered the diner, the atmosphere shifted. The junior officers, who were taking statements from the wide-eyed patrons, noticed the change in their superior's demeanor immediately. The weary skepticism was gone, replaced by a look of profound, almost reverent respect. She walked directly to where Daniel and Marcus stood. She did not hand the ID card back casually. She held it out flat in her palm, a gesture of deference. "Master Sergeant," she said, her voice now formal, stripped of any hint of condescension. The title landed in the quiet room with the weight of a judge's gavel. The junior officers stopped writing. The patrons looked on, confused. Chen's voice was clear and carried across the room. "My apologies for the informal address earlier. I was not aware of who you were." Daniel simply took his ID, gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, and slipped it back into his wallet. "No apology necessary, Lieutenant," he said. "You were just doing your job." His humility was somehow more disarming than any display of skill had been. Chen, however, felt a professional obligation to correct the record, not just for herself, but for her officers and for everyone in that room who had made the same mistake she had. She turned slightly, addressing the entire diner as if it were a briefing room. "For everyone's clarification," she began, her voice ringing with authority, "this man, whose quick and professional actions likely prevented a far more violent outcome today, is Master Sergeant Daniel Reeves. He is an active-duty naval special warfare operator." A collective gasp went through the room. The patrons stared at Daniel, their minds struggling to reconcile the image of the quiet man in the hoodie with the words naval special warfare. It was a concept from movies, from news reports about distant conflicts. It wasn't supposed to be sitting here drinking coffee, looking tired. Chen continued, her words a direct repudiation of the muggers and her own initial assumptions. "His record indicates multiple combat deployments in theaters of operation I'm not cleared to know about. He is a recipient of the Navy Cross for extraordinary heroism in action. He is, by any and every measure, one of this country's most elite warriors." She let the words hang in the air, a public and definitive validation of his status. She then turned to her 2 junior officers. "Observe," she commanded. "This is what calm, competent threat assessment looks like. No shouting, no drawn weapons, no unnecessary force. Just a perfect economy of motion and a situation resolved with absolute minimum fuss. Take a lesson from it." She then faced Daniel again, and in a gesture that stunned the onlookers, she straightened her back and extended her hand for a firm handshake, a gesture of respect between professionals. "Thank you for your service, Master Sergeant, and thank you for reminding us what true professionalism looks like." The story of the diner takedown spread through the city's police department like wildfire. It began with Chen's official report, which was written in such glowing, almost mythic terms that her captain called her just to make sure it was accurate. Then the body cam footage from the junior officers was reviewed. It didn't show the takedown itself, it happened too fast, but it captured the aftermath. The stunned silence, the perfectly subdued suspect, and Daniel's unnerving, absolute calm. The footage became the department's hottest commodity, passed from phone to phone among the rank and file. It was a silent film that taught a masterclass in control. Seasoned tactical officers watched it and nodded in grim approval. Academy instructors showed it to recruits as a perfect, albeit unattainable, example of situational awareness and threat neutralization. The legend grew with each telling. He became known simply as the Ghost of Maple Street. The story transcended the police department. The patrons who had witnessed the event told their friends, their families, their co-workers. Their accounts were breathless, filled with a sense of awe. They described how the world seemed to slow down, how a quiet, unassuming man had moved with the speed and grace of a striking predator, dismantling a violent attacker with the detached precision of a surgeon. The diner owner, a woman named Mrs. Rivera, was inundated with customers who wanted to sit at the booth and hear the story firsthand. She was eternally grateful. In a gesture of thanks, she created a new menu item, the Guardian Special, and mounted a small, tasteful brass plaque on the wall above the booth, detailing the date of the incident and a simple dedication to the quiet professionals who walk among us. Meanwhile, the antagonist, a small-time criminal named Kyle, was having a very different experience in the precinct holding cell. His initial bravado had returned. He complained to his cellmates about how he'd been jumped, how it wasn't a fair fight. He was building his own myth, one where he was the victim of an unfair attack. That myth was shattered when Lieutenant Chen paid him a visit. She didn't threaten him. She didn't raise her voice. She simply slid a single sheet of paper through the bars of the cell. It was a heavily redacted printout of Daniel's service record summary. Kyle picked it up. He saw the words Naval Special Warfare. He saw Navy Cross. He saw the list of qualifications that read like a manual on how to be the most dangerous human being alive. He read it once, then he read it again. The color drained from his face. The bravado evaporated, replaced by a cold, stark, primal fear. He finally understood. He hadn't been robbed of his prize. He had been spared by a professional who had chosen to disable him with a wrist lock instead of ending his existence in any one of a dozen silent, instantaneous ways. His public humbling was complete, not with a shout, but with the quiet, devastating weight of ink on a page. He crumpled into a corner of the cell, the paper falling from his trembling hands, finally and truly understanding his own insignificance. Daniel, for his part, was entirely oblivious to the legend he was creating. The moment the police had the situation under control, his focus had returned completely to his father. He had answered the officer's questions with the same minimalist precision he applied to everything, his statement a dry, factual account of the events. He politely declined the offers of free meals for life from the grateful Mrs. Rivera, though he did accept a coffee to go for his father. As they walked out of the diner and back into the mundane reality of the afternoon, it was as if nothing had happened. He didn't speak of the incident. He didn't analyze his movements. The violence was a tool he had been forced to use, and now that it was over, he had put it away, cleaned and stored, ready for the next time it was required. His concern was for Marcus. "Are you all right, Dad?" he asked, his voice soft, the first hint of personal emotion he had shown all day. Marcus, a man forged in the crucible of urban policing, looked at his son, and for a moment he wasn't seeing the elite operator. He saw the little boy who used to fall asleep in his arms after a long shift. He saw the determined teenager who announced he was joining the Navy, and he saw the man he had become, strong, silent, and carrying burdens Marcus could only guess at. "I'm fine, son," Marcus said, his voice thick with a pride so immense it almost choked him. "I was never worried." They walked in comfortable silence for a block, the city's noise wrapping around them again. It was a young rookie cop, barely out of the academy, who caught up to them. He had been one of the first responders, and his face was a mask of youthful awe. "Master Sergeant," he stammered, his cheeks flushing. I just wanted to say that was the most incredible thing I've ever seen. How did you stay so calm?" Daniel stopped and looked at the young officer. He saw his eagerness, his nervousness, the raw potential in him. He offered him a small, rare smile. "You don't rise to the occasion," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "You sink to the level of your training. Stay calm in your training, and you'll be calm when it matters." He paused, then added one more piece of advice, and never, ever make assumptions about who you're dealing with. Respect everyone. Fear no one. The loudest person in the room is usually the weakest. The rookie nodded, the words sinking in, a lesson from a master he would carry with him for the rest of his career. Daniel and his father continued on their way, leaving the young officer standing on the sidewalk, watching the quiet professional disappear back into the anonymity of the crowd, his extraordinary competence once again hidden behind a veil of absolute normalcy. The event became a permanent part of the city's lore. A photograph of the small plaque in the diner circulated on law enforcement social media pages, a quiet testament to the day a loudmouth fool learned a hard lesson about the quiet strength that walks unseen beside us every day. Months melted into years, and the seasons turned. At the diner on Maple Street, Mrs. Rivera's business had never been better. Tourists and locals alike would come in, order the Guardian special, and sit at the small booth by the window, now a minor city landmark. The plaque on the wall had been polished so many times the brass gleamed. The story was told and retold, becoming a piece of neighborhood folklore, a modern parable about hidden strength and the folly of arrogance. For the city's police force, the Reeves incident became institutional memory. The body cam footage was now officially part of the training curriculum at the academy. It was shown to every new class of recruits during the module on threat assessment and de-escalation. Instructors would play the silent, grainy footage of the aftermath and then put Daniel's redacted service record up on the screen. The lesson was always the same. Look past the surface. Don't judge by age, gender, or size. Competence doesn't always wear a uniform. Sometimes it wears a hoodie and drinks coffee. Your first assumption is almost always wrong. Challenge it. The young officer who had spoken to Daniel on the street was now 3 years into his career. He was more confident, more measured, and had earned a reputation for being unnaturally calm in chaotic situations. He credited his brief interaction with the Master Sergeant as a formative moment in his professional life. Daniel's words, "You sink to the level of your training," had become his mantra. He spent his off-duty hours not just at the firing range, but practicing mindfulness, studying body language, and honing the quiet skills of observation and de-escalation. He was becoming a quiet professional in his own right, a legacy of Daniel's example propagating through the force. Marcus Reeves found a new kind of peace. His son was once again deployed to some unnamed, far-flung corner of the world, but the incident at the diner had given him a tangible glimpse into the world Daniel inhabited. He had always been proud, but now he understood the depth of his son's skill, the quiet confidence that was not arrogance but a simple statement of fact. He saw his own legacy of service, his 28 years of walking a beat and protecting the community, as a foundation upon which his son had built something extraordinary. It was a continuum of duty, a generational bond forged in service and sacrifice. The wallet the mugger had tried to steal now sat on Marcus's dresser, no longer just a wallet but a symbol of that day, a reminder that the fiercest guardians are often the ones you would least expect. The story became a teaching tool, a legend passed down from one generation of officers to the next. It served as a constant, potent reminder that true strength doesn't need to advertise, it doesn't need to boast or threaten, it simply is. It exists in the steady hands, the calm eyes, the measured breath of those who have dedicated their lives to a craft, whether it be policing a city street or operating in the shadows of foreign lands. The legacy of that single 3-second encounter was not one of violence, but of wisdom. It was a lesson etched into the culture of a police department and a neighborhood. It taught that prejudice is the crutch of the incompetent and assumptions are the currency of fools. It championed the idea that what you do is infinitely more important than what you say. The mugger's loud, empty threats had evaporated in the face of Daniel's silent, decisive action. His arrogance was a fragile shell, shattered by the dense, unbreakable core of competence. Worth was not declared. It was demonstrated. Power was not announced. It was revealed. True legacy isn't what you leave behind in monuments or plaques. It's what continues forward in the actions and beliefs of others. It lived on in the young officer who approached every situation with a new level of calm and respect. It lived on in the patrons of the diner, who looked at strangers with a little more wonder and a little less judgment. It lived on in a father's quiet pride and a city's enduring story. The quiet professional had come and gone, a brief, startling flash of brilliance in an ordinary day. But the light from that flash continued to illuminate a fundamental truth, that the most powerful forces in the world are often the most silent, and that respect is a debt paid only to those who have earned it, not with their words, but with their deeds. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over loud arrogance, where silent professionalism defines worth, subscribe to The Final Watch. We celebrate the unsung heroes who walk among us, the warriors who don't need to announce their strength because their actions speak volumes. Hit that subscribe button and join our community of those who appreciate true excellence in its quietest forms.